So we have this idea that we're born into, that we're supposed to have it all together. And we have an identity based on keeping it all together. We have good days when we are more together, and not so good days when life seems to be, thwarting us, and that can be so irritating when life doesn't play along with our plan, but on some level, our plan is not as important in the overall overarching picture of the universe as we would like to think. I think it's wonderful to consider ourselves part and parcel with all of the life on our planet and all of perhaps the life in the universe, to go beyond the small little parochial way that we think about things is kind of a way to put everything we're suffering through in a little bit of perspective. Is any of this going to be meaningful in 100 years? Is any of this going to be meaningful in 10 years? To what extent are the things we're stressing over right now going to lead us toward the things we want in the future? I'm going to recommend that what we want is a real connection to our heart. In the Shambhala Buddhist teachings, we call it basic goodness. And basic goodness is a translation of Dominic Sangpo, or it's all goodness, which is, an idea that we are all imbued with Buddha nature. I know Christians in some sects have the idea of Christ nature, that all of us are part of the deity, all of us are part of the perfection of the universe. And in a way, we're so fortunate. No matter how difficult our life is, how much we bitch and moan about it, we are like on the vanguard of waking up in the universe. Nobody else in the solar system really has this kind of cognitive awareness. I'm not sure where else it exists except in us. We have this rarefied opportunity to be able to really see, feel, touch, and taste our world. But there are 6 senses according to the Buddhist teachings: see, feel, taste, and touch, but also think. Also, the 6th sense is our mind, and the way the mind constantly interprets all of these things. And the mind can interpret all of it as being incredibly miserable, or it can interpret all of it as being really possible and practical. And it could interpret all of it as being incredibly extraordinary. With being a Buddhist, I vote for the middle way. I don't know that life has to be spectacular, but it's not as difficult and as hard as we make it, I think. At least I know that I make it harder and more difficult. There are ways to recondition the mind so that we could work with that. So we could actually wake up in the morning and do gratitude list, gratitude practice, and actually remind ourselves of the things that we conveniently forget when we're bitching about the few things that are bothering. What are the things that we actually will miss when they're taken away from us? What are the things that we really love right now? And to actually really look at the possibility of how often do we have real human connection? How often are we willing to share our heart with each other? In the Buddhist teachings, the cornerstone of our spiritual path is built around the idea, the cornerstone is, the path is built around the idea of the cornerstone being, language is not always easy, is it? The idea of meditation practice. And meditation practice is the bedrock of what we're doing here, because it actually creates an opportunity for us to reconnect to our basic goodness. reconnect to the depth of our experience, and begin to live a life that's more genuine. Does it mean that we're going to get what we want? No, I don't know if that's the case. It may be that we have to change what we want, so we want what we get. But what's more important is that we start to really begin to understand who we are and how we are, and actually start to really learn to be truthful with ourselves and accept ourselves for the loving, fantastic beings that we sometimes are. The cornerstone of the cornerstone, the basic tenet of meditation practice, is the idea of mindfulness and awareness, shamatha vipassana, this idea of these two aspects, very natural and innate aspects of the mind that work together. Mindfulness is the natural ability of the mind to hold to an object. In Tibetan, they say trenpa, or to hold. That gets retranslated when we talk about meditation, actually placement. The ability to place the mind on an object. It's long enough to know how to use it or what we should do with it. By placing our mind intermittently on objects during our day, we actually allow the mind to have this tactile connection to our world that makes our world feel more practical and more workable. Being here, placing our hand on our heart, placing our hands on our thighs, placing our feet on the ground as we walk, are all aspects of placement, which are aspects of this idea of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness becomes tempered and lives within the larger realm of awareness. That's the environment. So it's not as though we'd be walking down the street of the city going left foot, right foot, now I'm eating. And people do that in extreme meditation, sessions, right? And I've done these long retreats, and I've done some of them as group retreats, and people get really like so slow and religious with their chewing in each moment. And that's a lot of mindfulness and not a lot of awareness, because awareness kind of mediates that and says, okay, you don't have to fixate on connection to the present moment. You just connect and then relax and open, connect and relax and open. So the key, I think, to meditation practice, particularly if you want to do any kind of extended practice, is to see it more like a rhythm or a dance, rather than the idea that we're stuck in the present, and every time we leave the present, we have to berate ourselves and drag ourselves kicking and screaming back to the present. One way I heard that said rather sweetly, actually, was a fellow in one of my meditation classes who suggested it was like training an errant puppy, but that it was really more effective to train that puppy with love, to keep bringing that puppy back and teaching it it's okay to sit still. And the reason we don't want to sit still, there are a number of reasons, but among them is fear. We're frightened. We're kind of a little bit frightened to just be us. We're kind of frightened that we're not enough. We're kind of frightened that we haven't done enough. We're kind of frightened that it's all leaving us so quickly. We're kind of scared, And so when we're scared, we want to do something about it. That's classic. We want to check out, When there's fear, we want to feel in control. And usually what happens is we will select something that has nothing at all to do with anything pertinent or present in our life and begin to fixate on that. So somewhere in our mind, we feel like we're working on something. you know. I used to get myself drunk enough that it was very hard to walk home. The like usually when I lived in Manhattan, 4 blocks to my house, but it felt like I needed that challenge to occupy my mind to prove that I could do it, you know? How many challenges do we set up in our life to just prove something to ourselves that have nothing to do with what we need to be doing right now in the present? And fear is more apparent in the present moment, because when we're not in the present, we're spinning off and we're anxious about the future or regretful about the past, perhaps. Right? But we're not really dealing with what's happening right here, because that is even scarier still. But that's a ridiculous shift in perception. It's not absolutely true at all. There's a part of our psychology, a very deep, ancient part of our psychology, that's charged with our survival. And that part of our psychology, it's really in the neurology of it. It's based in our kind of neurological system, you know? And that part of our psychology doesn't care if we're relaxed. It doesn't care if we're enjoying ourselves, or doesn't care how our hair looks. It just wants us to survive. And when we get frightened, it clicks into survival mode sometimes, especially if we have a history of some kind of traumatic difficulties in our lives, and that kind of post-traumatic situation comes more into play. 2 things happen when we get triggered like that because of our fear, and we get triggered into a survival mode, is we kind of brown out. Maybe we don't completely have a blackout, but we kind of have a brownout. We're not really paying attention, and we're not operating on our ideal mental ability, which would be a full mind, which would be mindful, right? We're operating on this partial mind because we're lashing out, closing our eyes, and just leaping forward to get something done because we're nervous. Or we're just leaping forward to get the heck out of there because we're nervous, or we're leaping forward to just berate ourselves. One of the simple examples, this is becoming very dramatic, so I'm going to lighten it up, because a lot of things are very mundane daily things that we deal with. When we lose our keys, and this is an example I've used a lot, so pardon me, but when we lose our keys, we usually never lose our keys if we're not already late. It's usually the worst possible timing. And when that happens to me, I will start flipping out, like, why didn't I figure this out beforehand? Why didn't I have them ready, right? And I will even flip out to the extent of like, why didn't I have it all laid out before I went to bed at night? Like, that's what people really do. You know, I will actually be using my brain for all these possible supposed scenarios that have nothing to do with finding my keys, right? And I have had the experience, it's not always, but occasionally had the experience that I think is very telling, that as soon as I stopped doing that and just sat and just relaxed and scanned through my body and tried to release the gripping panic tension, that it occurred to me that I was wearing a different pair of pants yesterday, or whatever it is. But when we relax and come back down to the present, and we have this ability to be mindful, right? Then we're operating with the optimum sort of effectiveness of our mind. When we're freaked out and panicked and spinning around in circles, we are operating with no real effectiveness of our mind. The best we can do are things we've done before, and we just kind of do them out of rote. We kind of do them with our eyes closed because we're scared, you know. So I'm suggesting that with mindfulness, we could begin to look at it not as you should be present, because we're dealing with fear here. And when we're dealing with fear, many of our fears are rooted in childhood. They're like, in essence, was, remember, I'm dating myself, but the Indigo Girls, Kid Fears, it's such a great song from the 80s. I recommend you look it up and listen to it. But the idea is that when you're frightened, there's a panic response. Our body and mind spasm, and we grip to some primal strategy. This primal fight, fright, or freeze exit strategy is not awake, and it's not adult. An effective awake and adult response is to employ loving kindness. That won't necessarily find the keys, but it will keep us from berating ourselves. It'll keep us from spinning around, and it might bring us into a more gentle and effective contact with the present, which is mindfulness. So I'm going to suggest that we kind of combine this idea of loving kindness, which is bringing this feeling of love, regard to ourselves or to an external situation, and that we bring that into contact with our mindfulness practice, so that when we place our attention, we're actually placing our loving kindness. You see, that is how you effectively combat fear. Not through pushing, not through cajoling, not through, you better toughen up. When a kid comes into the room frightened, there are any number of ways that you reflexively want to just throw them out or yell at them or explain that monsters don't exist, but none of those things work. What really works is love. And to accept the frightened child within ourselves, and just say, okay, it's okay. And the ideal scenario would be that once the nervous system calms down, then the kid goes back to bed and faces the dark, because they will now have the bravery of that tactile connection. It's that tactile connection, that placement of our mind on the present moment, really tangible ways, that lets us feel like we are handling our life. I stopped short of saying in control of our life, because we cannot control anything really. But we can be here, and we can be here now. And we can train ourselves to be here now in a way that's loving and kind. Train ourselves. Now, how do we do that? Anybody? You in the back? That's right. Mindfulness practice. That's right. Daily meditation practice. That's right. By daily doing the meditation practice where we see our mind go off, and again, my guess is, whether we notice it or not, there's fear in there somewhere. We're afraid to sit still. We're afraid to be present. We're afraid to have nothing on our screen, you know? So we want to dig stuff up. And every time we catch ourselves doing that, we notice it and bring the mind back to the rhythm of the breathing. And each time we come back to the rhythm of the breathing, we create more and more space in the system. We allow the nervous system to begin to settle. And when that nervous system settles, we can allow the mind to begin to clarify and be present. The mind clarifies and it can see what it needs to do right here and right now. So it's operating from its full potential when the body is relaxed, when we're in synchronicity between our body and our mind. So the practice is to continually bring ourselves back to that contact point. And I think a lot of people do. I did my meditation practice. Well, what did you do during that time? I'm not blaming anyone. I do the same thing. I'm just like driving yourself home half drunk and you don't really know how you got home. Well, it's the same thing. My 10 minutes is up. That was my meditation. But it's possible we could actually look at meditation as mind training. And actually, when the mind is distracted, we bring it back to the present. Constantly and again, training ourselves that it's okay to be here. Bringing that frightened child, bringing that errant puppy, bringing that panicked mind back here. There's an interesting thing when we get frightened by the challenges of life, we kind of want to run away and do something else, fix something else in our head, right? But by running away, we only make ourselves more frightened. You might think that you're getting away from whatever's causing the anxiety, but in fact, you're not, because that deeper part of your psychology that is charged with your own survival is constantly freaked out if you're not paying attention. Because paying attention is the only way we can actually effectively protect ourselves. When we're lost in fantasy, when we're lost in ideas, when we're scheming and planning things that have nothing to do with right here and right now in the present, we're freaking out our deeper psychological mind. That's like, there's nobody at the helm of this ship. By bringing ourselves back to the present, no matter how challenging the present moment is, we actually reduce the stress and tension in our experience. That seems crazy because you would think you want to run away from the challenges to reduce the stress. It only creates more stress. But by bringing ourselves back to the present, teaching ourselves that it's actually not a catastrophe, teaching ourselves that it's actually okay to be here, we actually learn two things. One, how to be mindful in our life, how to be present, but also two, really how to love ourselves. To some extent, when we come back to the present, it is an expression of loving kindness. And we're not gluing ourselves to the present or berating ourselves for not being present. We're resting, placing our mind on the present, placing our mind on chewing our food, placing our mind on walking down the street, but also allowing ourselves to have a little bit of movement and freedom so that we might drift off and then we come back. We might drift off, but then we come back. We might panic and it's okay. Then we come back. The practice is to keep coming back, not to lock ourselves here, but to just gently keep coming back. So the way to train ourselves to that, and I'm going to end here, is literally feeling your placement of your intelligence, your awareness, your consciousness on very specific aspects. In meditation practice, on the breath. When you shower in the morning, you can do mindfulness practice and actually feel the parts of your body that are being cleaned. I promise you, it will make an extraordinary difference in how you manage stress in your day. And if you space out, which of course will happen, especially with the negative ions of the falling water, then you bring yourself back. Now I'm on my legs. How did I get down here? Peter Levine would talk about saying slow to the body parts in the morning. But the idea is it's that deep neurology that's so uptight and frightened and anxious becomes calm when we are paying attention to ourselves, just like the frightened child becomes calm when we are paying attention to it. So my thinking is we can actually work with ourselves to learn how to become compassionate people in the present moment. In your meditation practice, come back to the present and do it with love, not recrimination. And in your day, if you have a moment, if you're going off anyway in your head, just bring yourself back and feel what it feels like to have your feet on the ground, your hands in the dirt, your lungs breathing the air. Be part of our life. And when the mind pulls us away, simply come back. It's like holding your heart center. And when we do that, we find the courage to face our life heart first. Facing our fear, we can relax into our body, spirit, and mind and bring peace to our life. And maybe even radiate that peace out to all those in our experience. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your attention. And